everyone, Joe March here, aka Psycho Sorcerer, and today we're going to talk about 3 different topics that aren't generally thought of as related to one another, but that were related to one another in my own life. Those topics are Servitors, Tulpas, and shadow work. So let's start with Servitors, and here's what they say. Within chaos magic, a Servitor is a psychological complex deliberately created by the magician for a specific purpose to operate autonomously from the magician's consciousness. What the fuck does that mean? Luckily, I have a lot of experience with this, so I actually do know what that means, and we're going to talk about it. However, this is not a video about how do I make a Servitor. If you're looking to go make Servitors and all that kind of shit, find that elsewhere. I'm not telling you that. It's not hard. It's very easy to do, but you'll find out in a little while why I don't do it anymore. So let's break this apart. Starting at the beginning, a Servitor is a psychological complex. What does that mean? So in psychology, a complex is a structure in the unconscious that is objectified as an underlying theme, like a power or a status, by grouping clusters of emotions, memories, perceptions, and wishes in response to a threat to the stability of the self. It's not generally thought of as a good thing, but what we're talking about here with Servitors is a psychological complex deliberately created by the magician. So instead of having this complex happen on its own, in the background, in your unconscious or subconscious mind, you purposely create this complex in order to fulfill some purpose. Some people believe that what you're actually doing is creating a spirit, a servant spirit being that works for you. But it's never actually been positioned this way, and I don't believe that to be true either. What all the literature says, and what I believe as well, is that you're actually splitting a part of your own psyche off from the rest, and you're telling that piece, I want you to concentrate on doing this particular task. And then that runs itself in the background of your mind while you go about the rest of your day ignoring it. And there's positives and negatives to that. So if you think about magic in general, as we've talked about it before, you can cast a spell to cause a change to happen, but the change is actually happening in your mind. You're just changing the way you think and act in situations so that you're more likely to be the type of person that attracts the change that you want. And this is doing the exact same thing, except instead of changing your entire mind, you're taking a little piece of your conscious mind and putting it to the side to concentrate fully on this, as if you're making a little separate you that's just focusing on this. Now, the benefit of this is the same as a spell. It's going to bring whatever that's after into your life more often. It also perpetually continues until you decide to stop it. So unlike a spell that might make you a little more in the direction you're trying to go, this is going to keep trying to make those changes, make those changes, make those changes. However, this is taking up some of your conscious mind. Whether you realize it or not, this happening is a slight distraction in your mind. So, people that are out there all the time saying, hey, I got 1,000 servitors and they do all these different things. These people are scatterbrained as fuck. These people have split their own consciousness up so many times that the part that's left over for them is less of a percentage of their normally able mind than what a normal person has, by such a degree that they're spacey as shit, they get angry more often, they act basically like someone who's really fucking tired all the time. And it's because all their fucking servitors are constantly trying to alert them to shit as it goes through life. It's not a good way to live. If you're gonna do servitors, do a couple. Do 1, 2, maybe 3. I wouldn't go beyond that. If you think of it as like only 1% of your conscious mind is distracted by the servitor, you can see how it really quickly can add up, though, once you start getting into percentages. And you definitely don't want the servitors to be more than 50% of your mind, or you're fucked. All right, I've gone down the rabbit hole in a direction I wasn't supposed to go. Servitor is what they say. Okay. They say you can create a servitor in the same basic steps that you would make a spell, but instead you're making this other piece of yourself. Some people believe that you're making a spirit instead, but again, none of the literature really reads like that. You're making this other piece of yourself that's going to go on and on in your mind, in the back of your mind all the time, and basically alert you to things that's going to bring you whatever it is that you were trying to get. So think about it like this. Let's say you want a guardian servitor that's going to protect you. So now you make that, and that means now there's a part of you that's always a little more alert. It's always a little more ready to spot danger. That can be helpful in certain situations. However, it means there's always a part of you that's constantly looking for danger. So you are fundamentally changing your own view on reality as a result of this. So be careful if you get into servitors. I don't recommend it. I used to do it a lot. So I used to be a person who thought servitors were individual other things. I thought it was like creating spirits, and they would amass into an army that would bring about my wishes. And so I just kept fucking making servitors here, there, everywhere, whatever. And it fucked me up. It made me tired of shit. I was constantly like getting bugged by these fucking servitors. And I didn't even think about like, hey, what the fuck are you doing? Obviously, a lot of people who are fans of my old channel have heard the stories about how I've experienced poltergeist-like activity in the past, where I would walk into a room, things would be on a shelf in a certain order, I would walk out, I'd come back, and they'd be in a different order. And that type of stuff blew my mind. It used to be to me like, this is proof that there's actual spirits. And people always ask me like, well, how did you go from that to this? How did you just say, I don't know if there's any real energy spirits out there? And the best I've ever been able to tell them is that there's also this phenomena where you don't realize that you do these things. Like, you black out and this shit happens. So, why am I bringing that up now? Because it relates to these servitors. So in my experience, I had a time period in my life where I had all these weird supernatural experiences going on. I was starting to see shit. I definitely had weirdness in my house as well. And some of this I can't explain. Like, my dog used to bark at the corner of the office where I did rituals whenever, like, the night after I would do a ritual. There's all kind of weird shit going on in my house all of a sudden. And it all kept escalating and getting weirder and getting darker and scarier, right? So this is around the same time that I also started working with Tiamat. And Tiamat pointed out to me that I had a fuckload of servitors that I don't need. And the way she pointed that out to me is she fucking slammed my ass with these bitches. She basically had them revolt on me and attack my ass. Because that shit can actually happen. And this is what I mean by don't have more than 50% of your brain be servitors, you dummy. So I went into this weird psychological fucking warfare scenario that happened in my own head one night where I felt like I literally battled to stay sane. And in the end of it, what I had to do was reabsorb all these servitors and delete them, basically. Like, take my brain back 100% and get rid of all these servitors. And after that, all the weird shit that was going on in my house for the past year stopped. It was all because of the servitors. So some people would say, hey, that's an indication that these servitors are actually spirits and stuff, and you had gotten into some weird woo-woo shit. But from my point of view, it's even scarier than that. I think that if you have too much servitor activity going on, you can lose track of what you're doing. You can blank your own mind, and the servitor can fucking step in on that shit. So be careful. And also, people always ask me why I took down my old channel. And I always tell them it's because I knew a few people that went crazy because they tried some of the shit that I put out on there. And my most viewed thing on that old channel was how to make servitors. And this is why I was like, you know what? I don't feel responsible having it up there because other people are going to have this fucked up shit happen. And now I know it can fuck you up. So I yanked it all down. Now it's there. You can still go find it now, but now you got to go search for it. You got to go into my playlists, go to the old things, find the servitor one in amongst all the other stuff. You got to really want to watch it if you go back now, which means you probably have already heard me warn you not to do it at that point. So I feel okay with that. You know, I like things to be there from the old channel so people can go back and watch if they wanted to see something. People can see how I used to think and what I used to believe. I'm not going to get rid of them there, but they're unlisted. You can only find them through the playlist because I don't want random YouTube searches popping up my old servitor videos, someone being like, hey, that's actually pretty easy, making like 10, 20 servitors and losing their goddamn mind. So I'm not going to look down on you if you use servitors, but I don't recommend it. I will never use servitors again. It's always dangerous when you say never, but I have no intention of ever using servitors again. I would say, please think twice before you do something like that. Now, this brings us to our other topic, tulpas. We'll start with, what's a tulpa? So a tulpa is a concept in mysticism of an object or being that is created through spiritual or mental powers. Modern practitioners call themselves tulpamancers and use the term to refer to a type of willed imaginary friend which practitioners consider to be sentient and relatively independent. Now, does that sound a lot like a servitor? you created a separate part of your own brain, or some people think a spirit, and then gave it its own consciousness. Well, there's a thing here that you need to understand. Why is Tulpa different than Servitor? Because in Servitor, I said you give it a purpose. You say, hey, piece of my brain, you guard. Hey, piece of my brain, you help me bring wealth. Hey, piece of my brain. You're given a task to a piece of your brain, but it's still just an automated, like almost like a robot. A Tulpa has its own personality. And what I believe is happening here is the same thing that happens with people who have multiple personality disorder, except that when you create a Tulpa, you are purposely creating a multiple personality disorder within the self. And I've done this too! So people can make a Tulpa without making a servitor, and people can make a servitor without making a Tulpa. But my dumbass made servitors that had their own personalities, so I made a bunch of fucking Tulpas. And those are the shits that came after my ass. And one specifically was powerful as fuck, like in my mind. He was like a mentor figure. And this motherfucker tried to take me out that night. And so this is what it was all about. I not only had too many servitors, I made these things into Tulpas. Now, why bring any of this up? Again, cautionary tale. Some people want a Tulpa. Some people want a friend, or they want a spirit guide, or whatever. And a Tulpa can be useful because it's sort of like a bridge between the conscious and subconscious. Some people would even argue that my teacher idea of the subconscious, where you can actually talk to it, is like a Tulpa, except that I believe that for me it's my subconscious and then there's a veneer of a Tulpa-like interface, as opposed to it literally maintaining a continuous, endless, separate personality. But what's the problem with Tulpas? They can take over. You can lose control, and they take over. And I think this is what accounts for a lot of actual possession that people talk about. You make a Tulpa, and then sometimes it's in control instead of you. So, scary ass shit. So my early working with Tiamat, I think there's a video where you could see me channeling Tiamat back in the day, and I saw this vision of multiple me's. That's what this was about. It was about getting my shit together. It was about pulling all these pieces back together, reconnecting my brain so that I was a normal-ass person again. Because luckily, when you create Tulpas on purpose, and when you create servitors on purpose, you also have the ability to uncreate them. You can pull them back into your mind without too much difficulty, as long as you really want to shift back and you use the same principles, the same sort of magic practice to undo them. Now that brings us to our last topic, shadow work. So what is shadow work? You hear people talk about it all the time. Shadow work is working with your unconscious mind to uncover the parts of yourself that you repress and hide from yourself. Ah, yeah. There's lots of ways to do this. For me specifically, I worked with an entity called the Morgan. The Morgan, I later found out, was the exact same entity that I later called Tiamat and earlier had called Tiamat, and that I now look at as just the universe or God. I look at it as my subconscious, unconscious speaking to me. We've gone through this already. But, hilariously enough, the Morgan had told me at the time, I will appear to you like this right now because it will help you to do what you need to do, which makes more sense to me now. Instead of getting into what she really was or what it really is, it needed to help me with this work. And it was me deciding I needed to finally do this shadow work and diving into my own unconscious. But because I had a deeper problem, and that problem is described in some old videos as well, I had been seeing what I believed were entities for a long time at this point. Things that weren't from grimoires or anything. They were their own unique creatures, which spoke to me as if I was one of them, and would tell me different things and all this, that, and the other. It's part of why I got into the occult originally, was to try to explain this weird shit that I saw. What I found out through this shadow work is that these were fragments of myself, known as soul fragments for people who are familiar. It's when you have a real trauma as a child and a part of you breaks off and those memories are no longer able to be accessed by you. They don't go away. They kind of become their own little bubble. And if you allow it to fester and you don't ever deal with it, they can become their own tiny personality or tulpa. So I had accidentally built a shitload of tulpas before I even knew what servitors and tulpas were. And the Morgan was taking me through and reintegrating them. And those, since they are not purposely built tulpas and servitors, they are actual fragments of your personality. Those are not easy to get back. You can't do that just by willing them back, because they're not casually made. These things are deeply related to inner trauma, and you have to go back and re-experience the trauma and live through it again and accept yourself and the situation in order to reintegrate them. So this was over a year of my life just doing this, and it was painful and it was hard, and when it ended I found love. I used to live in a place of fear, and that's part of why everything that I see has shifted. When I talked to Tiamat, she changed from being a frightening, gigantic serpent to being a loving everything that is around you. I started to see all this stuff differently, and it changed the way that I viewed it. And also, all these random walk-in beings that I thought existed had been proven to be parts of myself. And at that point, I no longer had past experiences having dealt with them as actual spirits. I had proven to myself, through the work, that everything I'd worked with all along had been my own fucked up, psycho mind, and yet I had been able to repair it, to bring it back together, to fix it. Now I might not be the most stable person you've ever met, but now I live very close to a normal life because of it. So what's my purposes in bringing up these three things? One thing, shadow work is the fucking bomb. If you got past issues to deal with and it's causing you to see shit and have like other kind of mental problems, don't just think I'm nuts, I need drugs, and I need to get locked away. You can actually work through this stuff and you can actually get better. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't go and talk to the right people and get the right help if you're in a place where you're actually going to do something bad? No, definitely. If you're in a situation where it's too far and you need to be like medicated for a time, there's nothing wrong with that. Do what you need to do. But in the end, always remember, there is coming back from it. There is a time and place where when you're ready and you can do the healing, you can come back from that brink. And shadow work, for me, is the process. And different people, again, do it differently. Some people do it through writing. Some people do it through talking. Some people do it a lot of different ways. For me, it was just this weird-ass fucking trippy spirit world thing, which is why journeying is just the way that I do stuff, because journeying is the way that all of this worked for me. Why else do I bring it up? Why talk about servitors and tulpas at all, aside from to talk about my shadow work? Well, we just talked about egregores last video, and a lot of people get egregores mixed up with tulpas. They think like, oh, an egregore is when somebody conceptually builds some idea of some being and it becomes real. That's a tulpa. That's not an egregore. So really, I just want to clear that up on the side. And when I thought about clearing that up, I realized, oh shit, I should probably talk about all the shadow work and shit. That's the real big benefit I got out of the occult. Because without going through all this occult stuff for me, I would have never realized that what I was seeing was psychological. Not everybody gets the same thing out of going through the occult. Some people go into the occult and they suddenly become more spiritually minded and they go more down the rabbit hole of religions and they become more dogmatic. And some people have my experience where they go through it and they become more grounded as a result. They figure out what's going on inside and they learn about the self. Not everybody has the same experience, which again is why I'm like, not everybody needs to do this. But if you are someone who just feels the need to do it, and you know there's problems that are showing up as something in your mind that looks real, like an entity, maybe look into shadow work. And if you're somebody who's got a ton of servitors and hasn't thought about maybe this is what's going wrong in your life, look into that too. I hope if anybody needed that message, they got it. And other than that, I'm going to call it a day from that one. And until next time, safe travels.